Welcome back. It's time now for Eye on Africa with me, Tom Burgess-Watson. Our headlines this evening. Algeria hosts its first Arab League summit since the COVID pandemic. Food security, political turmoil in Libya and Sudan, and also the Nile dam dispute, all on the agenda. Tensions are running high between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. This as M23 rebels gain ground in the DRC. Intense fighting in northern Kivu is leading to a major population displacement. Coming up, we'll have all the latest from our team on the ground. And at the second presidential summit on gender-based violence in South Africa, activists call out President Ramaphosa, asking him what he's done to combat violence against women since pledging he'd make the issue a top priority 4 years ago. We begin in Algeria, where the Arab League summit kicked off earlier on today. This is the first summit since 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic struck. Well, despite appearances, there are some deep political divisions, not least because those countries that have normalized ties with Israel, and there are those that have not. Well, ahead of the summit, Arab ministers drafted a resolution on food security. France 24's Caroline Lambolet filed this report for us.
Leaders from across the Arab world continued flocking to Algiers on Tuesday. Among them, the Egyptian president. Several key figures are absent, such as Moroccan King Mohammed VI, who, despite weeks of speculation and reports he would attend, will not be at the summit. Ahead of the meeting, the Arab League Assistant Secretary General struck an optimistic tone.
The meeting between the four ministers proved that there is consensus around all topics that were discussed. Some issues led to tensions, but they have been contained.
The years since the last summit have witnessed drastic changes. A string of normalization deals with Israel, more protests in Algeria, Iraq, and Sudan, and most recently, a food crisis brought on by the Ukraine war. Countries in North Africa have been particularly hard hit and are experiencing wheat shortages. Leaders will also be discussing the political gridlock in Libya and the situation in Sudan, where protesters have been calling for a civilian state. On the streets of Algiers, expectations for the summit are low.
We hope that Arab countries can agree and develop. Arab leaders do not keep their promises. Like we say, the mountain gives birth to a mouse.
We hope that there will be unity, but it is difficult. This Arab summit must be followed by other meetings with the same Arab officials so that this conference can be successful. They always meet and then never see each other again.
Arab leaders will face the challenge of formulating a final resolution. In order for it to pass, it must be voted on unanimously.
On Monday, thousands of people took to the streets in Goma in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. While those taking part in the protests were expressing their anger at Rwanda, they're also angered by the advance of the armed rebel group, the M23, which some in the DRC and in Washington accuse Rwanda of supporting, where Rwanda denies this and has expressed regret that its ambassador to the DRC has now been expelled from the country. Well, France 24's Clément Di Roma is in Kigali with this update for us.
Against Rwanda in Goma, a Congolese city bordering Rwanda, on Monday, the Rwandan government has suggested to its citizens wishing to go to the DRC and cross this border to take all the necessary precautions. The protest happened at a time when the two countries continue to accuse each other of being at the origin of the renewed tensions in eastern DR Congo. According to the head of the Congolese diplomacy, the Rwandan army comes to the aid and advances under cover of the M23, end of quote. But for Kigali, its Congolese neighbor is trying to make Rwanda a scapegoat. International diplomats have been reaching out to both countries. The United States, the European Union and the African Union have called for de-escalation and dialogue. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called directly Rwandan President Paul Kagame. Following this call, the latter said on Monday that the ways and means to de-escalate are with us building on Nairobi, Luanda and international efforts. We just have to commit ourselves to applying them, end of quote. Another new development, Congo's foreign ministry recalled its temporary chargé d'affaires from Kigali and ordered its newly appointed ambassador to Rwanda not to register his credentials. The expelled Rwandan ambassador Vincent Karega already left Kinshasa.
That was Clément Diroma speaking to us there from Kigali. Meanwhile, the fighting continues in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Since June of this year, the M23 rebels have been in control of Bunagana, which is a strategic commercial town on the Ugandan border. Well, the violence in Rutshuru has resulted in the significant displacement of people. France 24's Aurélie Bazara-Kibangula and Justin Kabumba filed this report for us.
This school is now housing displaced people. Around 4,000 households have arrived at the site of Mboga, about 10 kilometers away from Goma. This family came to escape the shootings and the bombings.
I fled from Kanombe. I fled the war between the M23 and the army. They were fighting in our village. We heard a lot of shots and we fled to Rugari, but the situation got worse and we were forced to flee on foot.
People here say that M23 rebels are trying to take control of the National Road 2, a strategic axis between Goma and Rutshuru. This farmer was terrified as she fled and left without taking anything with her.
Since we've arrived, we still haven't found food and the children are getting sick. Sometimes we take them to the health centre, but because of the war, they still have difficulty recovering. They're not healthy, they have trouble sleeping, and look at me, I can't sleep either. We're really suffering.
Aid workers at the Mboga site are struggling to keep up as the fighting escalates. New families in need of help arrive every day.
We don't know what we are going to do with the displaced and what they're going to eat. This is a delicate situation. The living conditions are deplorable. We have already buried 14 people, while more displaced people are arriving. We are afraid that we will have to bury other people.
The violence has ramped up displacement. Over 40,000 people have been forced from their homes around Rutshuru. Congolese authorities and United Nations experts on the DR Congo accuse Rwanda of supporting the M23. Kigali continues to deny any support for the armed group.
Now we're going to turn our eye to South Africa, the femicide capital of the world. Well, the country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has admitted that his government's response to gender-based violence and femicide has not been given enough urgency. At a presidential summit 4 years ago, a strategic plan was drawn up with the goal of combating what Ramaphosa called the country's second epidemic. But at a presidential summit on Tuesday, civil society called him and the government out, saying that little or nothing has been done about it. Just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, from April to June of this year, more than 800 women and close to 250 children have been killed there in South Africa. France 24's Nadine Theron has more now from Cape Town.
Activists are demanding what President Cyril Ramaphosa has done about gender-based violence and femicide at his second summit on the issues held near Johannesburg. A national strategic plan to combat gender-based violence and femicide was drawn up after his first summit in 2018, and Ramaphosa signed that plan in 2020. But since then, there's been a 13% increase in rape and sexual offences, and in the past year, a 50% increase in murders of women and children. Now, civil society wants to know what happened to the 21 billion rand that the government allocated to the fight, and why no promised national council to deal with these issues has been set up in the 4 years since. Ramaphosa thanked them for calling him out and holding him and his government accountable. He admitted the government is not nowhere where it wanted to be and that it could have and should have done a lot more. He did list some of the steps the government has taken, like amendments to 3 existing pieces of legislation that would protect women and children better. Ramaphosa says the Justice and Correctional Services departments are working hard to reform the criminal justice system, but the Commission for Gender Equality says that this system still fails victims dismally.
Nadine Theron speaking to us there from South Africa. Now, in the landlocked mountainous country of Lesotho, villagers have been enjoying some of the last horse races of the year. Well, it is a national sport in the country, but the horses also play a central part in daily life and also in the life of the economy. France 24's Camille Nedleg explains.
A centuries-old tradition, over in a flash. In the small landlocked kingdom of Lesotho, jockeys can win the equivalent of a month's salary in a single race.
I'm happy that my horse won the race. I'll be able to look after it. And as an owner, I will be able to do other important things too.
In this remote mountain area of Semonkong, the race draws villagers from miles around. Horse racing is considered a major social event here, and many like to gamble on their favourite steed.
No, this is beautiful. I mean, to see people organizing themselves like this, and I think it's really great. I enjoy it.
European colonizers brought horses with them in the 19th century. Generations of breeding eventually resulted in this local Basotho pony, a source of national pride. A medium-sized, hardy animal, the horses aren't just for sport. In this impoverished nation, they're also used to herd livestock and for transport.
Horses are important because you make lots of money when you sell them. We use the income we get from racing them to support our families.
Races are organised during the dry season, making this event one of the last of the year, before these villagers hunker down for a harsh winter in the mountains.
Well, on that sporting note, we leave you for this edition of Eye on Africa. More news coming up very shortly here on France 24.
They observe. They contact us. They report, film, photograph. They are the voice of the voiceless. Your eyes in the far-flung reaches of the world. The Observers, a network of 5,000 committed citizens working with France 24.
One of our observers in Côte d'Ivoire, Gaspard.
Amateur footage and testimonials checked by our journalists and broadcast weekly on The Observers, on France 24 and observers.france24.com.